Welcome to the Quest Podcast. It's all about my quest to restore my health, burn off the fat, and win my lifelong battle with weight. If any of these topics are of interest to you, then you're in the right place because it's my mission to share the techniques and strategies I've learned with you so that you can do the same. So pop in those earbuds and let's go.
So come along and take a look because I want you to see. The world is yours, look a little bit closer. If you want it, come and get it. You can take it over. You can make your tomorrows what you want them to be. You got the power in your hands to shape your history. You gotta take it up a level and go up higher. Purple fuel in the
Hey everybody, Melissa Curtis here. Thanks so much for stopping by the program today. And I just wanted to remind you that we still have the Jawbone Up wristband to give away. You can be automatically entered to win that by just leaving us a review or a rating in iTunes. Some of you have asked us how to do that. So if you go to fattofitmyquest.com/reviews, you'll see a video tutorial there which will show you exactly how to do it. It's step by step. Also, some people have asked how to subscribe, and you can subscribe to the podcast on your smartphone, your tablet, or your computer, either one, and you can set it up so you get the new episodes every week. They'll be automatically downloaded for you and ready to play. We try to bring you a new episode every Thursday, so Thursday mornings you should check and you should have a new one there. So there's a video on that same page right below the reviews one, which will show you how to subscribe. Now, today I have a special guest, and his name is Tyler Graham. Now, that might not be familiar to you, or it might not sound familiar to you, but Tyler's a journalist and an author. And in his journalistic and editorial capacity, he's been a pretty important person as far as popular publications, both online and offline. Well, I say that because he's been health and environmental editor at Oprah's magazine, the O Magazine, and also at Prevention Magazine, and also the environmental editor at Best Life, and health editor at Men's Journal. In addition to that, he's worked with some of today's most well-known health experts like Dr. Oz, Timothy Ferriss, Gary Taubes, and David Katz. So Tyler's going to take us on a little peek behind the scenes today and explain to us how some of these top publications actually choose the topics that they write about and why. And he's also going to talk about his book, The Happiness Diet, and some personal experiences and why he decided to write that book. So let's go meet Tyler.
Take a look because I want you to see. The world is yours, look a little bit closer.
Tyler, welcome so much and thanks for being on the program today.
Thanks so much for having me, Melissa. It's great to be here.
Great. The first question I want to start with is one that's because you've worked for so many of the top magazines in the world. Can you take us behind the scenes, us average folk, the readers of those publications and their online outlets, and let us know how they choose their topics for those articles that you write and edit?
Well, I mean, it depends on the specific outlet. Each magazine, for example, has like its own distinctive voice and character. So that editor or editors are going to be choosing content that's, specific to that audience. And a lot of times that, lends to bias. A good example was when I was at Oprah, they were really keen on stories about that really appealed to women's emotions. And those were things like, what's your eating personality? And, for me, as someone who's studied a lot of nutrition, people don't have different eating personalities, When you see the way that people, generally react to sugar, it's an addictive substance, which I think the last, 6 months or so has been really terrific because I've seen so many different reports in the media about why sugar is so toxic for us. And
yes,
Credit Suisse did this amazing report. I mean, it was for their investors, and it read, it was a little scary the way that they're looking at society in terms of like economic output and all this different kind of stuff. But it's that real now, and so many people recognize, just how bad sugar and refined carbohydrates are, that, they're using it to forecast their investments. So anyway, there's a lot of stuff like that that enters into magazines and the media that people say, well, this audience, I think they would be really interested in this. And the idea of whether or not the information is true isn't really part of the conversation. It's really, it's how that story is going to play on a cover line on the newsstand. Well, you'll see cover lines, for example, in magazines that get repeated over and over and over, and that's because they've been focus grouped and tested. And that headline about six pack abs, the reason it's there every time is because it sells more copies than any other cover line. And
exactly,
yeah, the other thing about how this stuff is selected is that just like they like to repeat, the media, likes to repeat certain things that they know sells well. They also, some other publications, are just the opposite. They want to do something different each month, so that there's always the new trend. There's always the new fad thing that everyone's doing that they think the reader needs to know about because it's like the next new thing, and in the gyms in Hollywood or whatever. And so, it's contradicting what you read last month, and it's just not, it's not really useful to the actual reader. And the people who are kind of like selling these ideas don't really have the reader's health or best interests in mind.
Yeah, exactly. I think now in the digital age that it's become for a lot of the magazines as well, it's really based on how many click-throughs they're going to get for that publication online, or for their website, or for other articles they have online, so they can get rewarded from the advertisements.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting too, though, is there's a lot of there's a lot to getting more clicks and all these kinds of things. But now that there are a lot of these different communities, whether it's CrossFit or paleo, that have massive cult followings, they drive numbers in ways that sometimes promote the best, most truthful stories. I did a story for the Atlantic Monthly about how Crisco was invented by Procter and Gamble. They were only making soap at the time and candles as well, and so their first food product was Crisco, and it was this the history of how we got margarine basically in this new food that no other culture had until America really started promoting it as a health food. And that just went off the charts online because people were so intrigued with the truth of where this stuff came from and the rich history of Crisco and what it says about America. So it kind of works both ways. It's interesting. A lot of the nonsense is kind of a flash in the pan, but then some of the more important stuff sticks around and gets passed around a lot longer.
Yeah, I'm glad that that story did so well, because I was going to mention that it's a fascinating story. I'll put a link to it in the show notes, because I love those stories. And there's been a couple of films or TV shows done by the BBC going back in time, back to the 30s and 40s, and kind of looking at how things changed in the U.S. and how we how we got to where we are today in terms of food, in terms of diet, and everything like that. And it's fascinating because you just don't think about it. You were raised a certain way, and you moved on into the working world, and then you don't have time for anything. But another point you've made in some of your articles is how some of the publications, as you just said, print things which may or may not be helpful or may not be actually true or science-based, but it just adds to the confusion of the person who reads about it, because they just kind of give up on actually seeking out the real answer or the real science behind some of the things, because every week it's a different thing.
Yeah. I think something that's interesting for sort of the general public, or the lay audience or whatever, to think about is, you sometimes don't consider who's on top of the food chain or the editorial pyramid or what have you at your favorite magazine. And what happens is that you have like an editor who kind of everything gets funneled through, and they'll go to their doctor and they'll say like, well, my doctor said this, So you need to do, so then they'll tell the writer or the editor, well, so you need to do this because this is what my doctor said. And so that's how a lot of things kind of get edited and end up in magazines. So in other words, like whoever's out there listening, like if you had your own magazine, you'd probably say, go to your doctor and your doctor says, what you should consider is this, this, this. Well, then that's what ends up in the magazine. There's not an editorial board that's, sitting here and vetting the information and saying, what, this is great, or this is wrong, or we should reach out to more people because of this or that. It can tend to be very one-sided, where when you see it presented in the magazine next to all these glossy advertisements and this, great artwork and great photography, that it went through this, immensely long vetting process, but more times than not, it hasn't.
Yeah, that's the thing that a lot of people, I mean, myself included, you just, like I said, you get busy, you're at your job, whatever, and you pick up something and read it and think, oh, but it does go in and it stays with you and it starts to shape your belief system as to what you should or shouldn't be doing. But I want to talk a little bit about your book, The Happiness Diet. The paperback and Kindle version, I believe, are available now, and also hardcover is available. Why did you decide to write that book?
My job, the thing is, there's a lot of, I'm not trying to promote myself, but there's a lot of people who are very reputable, in the media world, the media landscape, magazine writing, and all this kind of different stuff. Like Gary Taubes is, a friend of mine, and great example of a guy that just, he won't take anybody's shit. The New York Times writes a cover story on their magazine about how, you just, once you're overweight, it's just too hard to, body's meant to be overweight or something ridiculous. And, he got like 200 doctors to write, sign off on a letter to the New York Times, this is garbage and they shouldn't be publishing this stuff. And, a quick survey could have told you that this was wrong. And so anyway, I've had the great fortune to work with people like Gary. There is the opportunity to learn a lot of groundbreaking stuff that does show up in magazines and like the BBC productions recently that you talked about. And so I had the unique opportunity to be in touch with a lot of these people. I learned a lot from them. And at that time, when I decided to do the book, it was becoming pretty clear, and it's still not clear enough, but that sugar and refined carbohydrates, to be super simple, cause obesity and diabetes. And, once you read that 100 times, there's not much more to it. As a writer, as an editor, as a storyteller, what was becoming also very clear at that time was all these connections with the diet and the brain. It just makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's so basic when we're kids. We learn you are what you eat. Well, how is it that we never really took that advice to use? Like, it's bizarre. Our whole society, that's one of the first things we learn when we're kids, and then we just throw it out the window. So I just got really interested in that, and with a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist, we tackled the subject and kind of compiled all of the literature that was out there then. Just in health media in general, what happens is a lot of, there's this over here and then there's this over there. Well, those researchers never pick up their heads to, talk to each other. And so that's kind of what precipitated that book. When I'm reporting stories, I can't tell you how many times I'm talking to one researcher and he's telling me this interesting thing. And then I ask him a question and he says, well, how could that be true? And I said, well, I was talking to this researcher in Canada who's working on this thing. And then he says, oh my gosh, what's his name? And then, he writes it down, looks it up, but that's like my job. That's what I do.
Right,
it's his job to research, or her job to research, whatever it is that they're focused on. But there's just so much information out there. It's hard for everyone to stay on top of it. But like you were mentioning, now it's quite nice how the internet is connecting us and these discoveries are being sped up.
That's one thing that makes me feel really optimistic, is I think that this is a really good time in history for us to maybe turn things around and get the right information to people, because in my opinion anyway, it may not be completely true, but I think the ability now for so much of the population worldwide to seek out the truth and true articles and true research online, and the decline of television having such an influence that it had over like most of my lifetime, that it's allowing change and truth to be wider, wider. I want to say wider broadcast, but get to a wider market, because a few people at the top don't kind of have a stranglehold on what's going to be published, printed, or put out for public consumption.
Yeah.
And that's exciting, because I think that, plus, in my opinion, technology will really enable the individual to make some massive changes. But one of the things you talk about in your book, you focus on quite a bit, is the mood and the food, how food influences people's moods. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? And the other thing is the word you coin in there called garbage.
Yeah, well, that was coined by Jimmy Moore, I think.
Okay. Yeah, Jimmy. Yes, yeah. Amazing story.
Yeah, and that was a while back. He should keep using that word. I don't think he uses it anymore.
Yeah, it's a great word because it describes so much of what's consumed.
Yeah, and it makes people, it's like, well, what do you mean garbage? And you're like, well, I mean orange juice. That's garbage. It's not nutritionally different from Coca-Cola for the most part. And then I like the word because it creates a conversation, that, donuts are just as bad as pancakes, which some people just don't, for some reason, think that, or that bread actually raises your blood sugar more than table sugar does. And one of the interesting things is when I was doing the book, I was kind of saving the sugar chapter for last, because I thought, we all know that sugar's bad for you or whatever, and that will be really easy. And that ended up being the most difficult chapter, because at that time, there's a lot more now, but at that time there wasn't a lot written about sugar. And it's weird. You could go to the bookstore and find a million books about how bad fat is for you, but there's, maybe 5 about the evils of sugar, And it was because a lot of it was, it's been prized as this fuel for athletes and all this different kind of stuff for a really long time. So it didn't get, there's a lot of bias. It didn't get the research support that it should have, which it's starting to get now. So yeah, that was just mind-boggling to me. And this story of sugar is just so unbelievable and crazy. Like, I read about the deep history of it. The crack of dawn is actually a term from the sugar plantations, in the Caribbean. I mean, that's what the African slaves woke up to, was that whip at dawn. And that's kind of where sugar really starts its history in America. And, those people who suffered this great injustice now are also, as their descendants are kind of suffering from the diseases of sugar now more than other parts of the population. And it's just had really, disastrous consequences on our society. But when people, just any person, when you kind of get off the sugar roller coaster, your mood becomes more stabilized. You actually get a lot more energy. You don't get as hungry. I mean, it's just, it's weird when you realize that calories aren't really the equation that you should be looking at if you want to get in control of your health. You should really be trying to figure out how different foods affect your hormones and affect, kind of your mood. And once you get a handle on that, you start seeing how easy it is to keep weight off. I mean, it's effortless. I was probably 30, 40 pounds overweight years ago now. Mm-hmm. And I was just like lethargic, and I never exercise. And I just thought, geez, I got to start eating better, and exercising more. And really, it didn't have much to do with exercising. It was that I was eating, 2 portions of pasta at a really nice restaurant in New York City and didn't have any idea what it was really doing to me. I made a choice when I was in my early 30s, I started cutting back on that stuff, and I had no idea that I would learn like 5 years later that I was only a quarter of the way to go.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's just, I mean, when I think for most people, when they first cut carbs or something, they usually are like at the 1.0 version, and they need to be at the 2.0 or 3.0 version to really feel the effects of clean eating and, optimizing your true human potential, through your diet.
Right, right. It's one of the questions that I get asked or that people complain about, and I know you've written about this as well, is that the kinds of foods, the grass-fed meats, the pastured poultry, organic vegetables, that it's too difficult for people to do that it's too expensive. And you've talked about this a little bit in some of your articles and also in the book. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
The idea that eating healthy is too expensive is, it's kind of ridiculous. But on the other hand, it does take thoughtful preparation, and it does take time. And, I actually probably sound like a jerk saying it's ridiculous, because if you're not exposed to it, if you don't have someone guiding you, helping you along, sure. I mean, it can be difficult and seem like too much to deal with, but there are a lot of things that are, really great starters to eating healthier. I think scrambled eggs is one of the easiest things that, anyone can cook, and it's incredibly healthy and filling and fulfilling. Coleslaw is another thing. I mean, just barbecue is, if you look at the cost of like a big pork butt and a head of cabbage and all these things. I mean, you can feed a family of four very inexpensively with just simple food. I mean, we were talking about beans, coleslaw, and a bit of meat there, and it's just not as expensive as one would like you to believe. And really, the voice telling America that it's too expensive is the processed food lobby. I mean, let's be honest here. You have Coca-Cola, you have Nabisco, all these companies, Nestle. They fund these lobbyist groups that promote these messages to the American public. It's like when Bloomberg was trying to ban these very large sodas. Whatever side you come down on that issue, whether you think the government should be able to ban a 72-ounce soda, the message wasn't funded by the people. It was funded by the sugar lobby. So I think when people understand that, they kind of look at this idea of, how to feed your family in an economical way a little bit differently. And it's just a shame that the food industry has such a vested industry in undermining our health and tricking us into eating unhealthily. I mean, there was a story in Politico that I saw yesterday, I think. It was the craziest story I've seen in a long time. It was talking about how all these regulations that are going in now are really hurting the food industry, and they're going to have to spend a couple $2 billion converting their machinery to get rid of trans fats and all this different kind of stuff. And it's like, what? Like, how could anyone write this garbage? I mean, how much damage have they inflicted on the American public, and how much have they, tried to confuse us with their commercials? I mean, Coca-Cola is the worst. I mean, they this whole campaign about, this happiness campaign and all this stuff, it is just, they're the second coming of the tobacco lobby, and it's scary.
Yeah, I was going to say that's kind of how a lot of people view the situation with food in the U.S. right now, and well, I guess in most of the Western countries, is that will it go the way of the tobacco companies? And that kind of leads me into my next question, which you might want to.
Just to interject really quickly, it already has. I mean, the industry have hired all of the tobacco lawyers.
Yeah, and the companies are owned by former tobacco companies. Am I right on that? There's
yeah.
like I was trying to think. Kraft, weren't they bought by Altria or the parent
They
company of Altria? I'll put a link in the show notes to the answer to this. this just
Yeah,
so
well, the answer is I'm just trying to. I believe Philip Morris owned Kraft and a bunch of other
right.
processed food manufacturers, and then they changed their name to Altria to kind of,
Right.
be
Make it sound nice.
yeah.
But yeah, that was the next question was, how do you see it going in the future? Because one of the big questions we all ask ourselves, those of us who have seen the light, is how will we get clean food sources in the future, since so much of the farming and farm industry or normal farming from back in the day has been destroyed and taken over by massive corporate farming. And it's not that, like, I'm not saying corporations are all bad. It's just the way they do it and the use of pesticides and things that destroy the permaculture in the land.
I mean, I don't know the answer, and this year actually is quite terrifying with what's going on in California, because you have, one of our most productive agricultural spaces in the world. It's about to go fallow. So, there are a lot of problems. There's the water issues now are just as important as the pesticide issues or the GMO issues. And I mean, I think really it starts with fixing the healthcare system. So, once we get a healthcare system that starts with, everyone's on the same page, you can't have dessert at breakfast and lunch and dinner, 7 days a week. And when we get the kind of momentum behind, the truth about healthy eating that, there was behind no fat, in the 80s, I think that's really going to drive the solutions, because it really starts with the individual person. And, there's 300 million now in America. And once everyone starts understanding, like, it's okay to eat a bunch of fat in the morning, because that's actually what your brain needs, and what keeps you satiated, and it keeps you overeating, and it keeps you healthy. And, then we can kind of start shaping the future and what those answers are to the questions that you just asked.
Yeah, I really think that as the average person becomes educated, like you said, that demand will begin to drive the companies to fulfill what the new demands are. In other words, I think demand will change, because just like you never used to see in my time, you never used to see organic foods in like an average, or out in California here, like a Ralph's or any of those supermarkets a few years ago. But then all of a sudden they began to have organic sections, and then the sections got larger. This is mostly for vegetables, but they do have meats as well now, grass-fed meats. And a few years ago you wouldn't have seen that at all. But there's obviously a demand that's causing big supermarket chains like that to make that change and carry those kind of products. And I'm hopeful that as people learn more about it, like from these conversations we're having today, that they will demand those products in greater quantity, and it will force the companies that are producing those products, and the small producers hopefully, to deliver more of that kind of product to the marketplace. I just hope that their standards are as high, because I could just, the whole rash of gluten-free products that came out as soon as the gluten-free, people began to stop buying gluten products. And it was hilarious, because when I did a food sensitivity test for myself, one of the things I was most reactive to was the gluten-free products that had the teff and the sorghum and all this stuff.
Sure. It's ridiculous. But I do think that we can only be hopeful of people being more aware of this stuff. I mean, as you were just talking about that stuff, it kind of reminded me of the situation in Ukraine right now. Vladimir Putin, went with this crazy move, to go into that country, and the reaction around the world, everyone on Twitter and Facebook and everything else is just like, what is going on? And it seems like seemed to like kind of slow it down a bit in a way that probably wouldn't have happened 20 years ago.
Right.
And similarly, there was an article today in the New York Times about how Missouri's trying to sue California because they have these new standards for their hens,
I
and
saw
now they
that.
have,
I
yeah,
saw that.
now they have twice the space, so they can actually like turn around in their cage. And Missouri's going to sue California because California wants all their eggs to come from those kinds of hens. So Missouri's like, well, we're not going to do that. It's like, well, you can't sue California now with Twitter and all these social mediums because everyone's going to be like, what are you suing? You're suing to prove that every hen should live in a battery cage. I mean, it just doesn't. It's just pure nonsense. And I think that all these channels are really helping to kind of stop out that just kind of just insanity.
Yeah, that's as I say, that's the thing that makes me hopeful is the fact that the internet is available now, and hopefully it'll stay as free as possible. Fingers crossed, and won't be shut down or controlled. But also just the whole technology spectrum, in my view, that is coming online now, particularly from Silicon Valley. All these companies that are now beginning to take off, like the Wellness FX and those things, which make it possible for individuals very inexpensively to get control of their own health and track their own health and become involved in improving that same health. And I think when I can just totally relate to this because it's, 7 months ago, basically for me, but when you have the mindset that someone's telling you all the time, this is what you need to do, this is what you're going to have as medicine, and this is how it's going to go, you just don't take control. I like to say become the CEO of your own health. And once you're engaged, once I saw like my blood numbers and my biomarkers in Wellness FX, I was like, okay, so I see it now. This is what I need to change. This is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to need help, but I need to get this, and this down to here. And you just become totally engaged and focused. Whereas when you go to the doctor, you might get some medicine, you go home, you don't think about it. You just say, okay, well, I have to take medicine now. And you don't realize, because you're detached in that way, that actually you're helping your own health decline. Instead of making it better, you're just masking the symptoms of things that are going to catch up with you later. So I'm really optimistic about a lot of these new companies that are getting a lot of funding and that are actually taking off and becoming profitable to help the average person without tons of money behind them to just get control and manage their health.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's definitely promising.
Hopefully. All right. Well, we're almost out of time here, Tyler, for today. But any other subjects you wanted to touch on as relates to your book or your articles that you've written? There's a ton of them, and I encourage people, I'll put a link in the show notes, to visit your website because you've got a lot of great information there and a lot of your articles. I don't know if all of them, but you have links to quite a few interesting ones. And the Crisco story is definitely a fascinating one.
Well, thank you. No, I mean, I just thank you for your time. Thanks for your attention to this important issue and getting it out there. And the more people just keep pushing, the better things are getting. And it's awesome to hear your story too, which is very inspiring.
Great, thank you. All right, so we'll put a link to your site and your book also, and I want to remind people they can actually get that right now, Kindle, paperback, or hardback, and we'll put direct links to it so they can get it, because it's a great read. It's not going to bore you. It's going to be very, very interesting. I enjoyed reading it a lot, and it's got some cool stories in there too, some of these historical background stories, so it's a nice read, and you'll learn a lot from it. And also, all science is quoted in there and science-based. And as you said, your contributing writer or advisor on this was his name escapes me.
Drew Ramsey.
There you go. And he's a psychiatrist? Or
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, he's a practicing psychiatrist in New York City.
Right. So that's important because you definitely touch on several areas about brain function and mood and how it affects. And I can testify that food and mood are definitely connected, and brain function, as the science now shows, is huge.
One thing that I would like to add, actually, now that you bring that up, is you just were talking about the pills and all this kind of stuff, and I mean, if you choose your pill, go on Amazon, and there's going to be a book explaining to you why that pill is harmful or doesn't work. I mean, that's kind of the the state we're in right now because these things weren't studied for the long-term use. And a lot of these are more like, designer drugs, like your drugs for like ADHD. And then a lot of the antidepressants and stuff like that. And there's clear that like, those are helpful for some people, but the prescriptions have just been completely overblown. And that was like a big thing, big reason for doing the book was this idea of like, you go to your doctor and like no one goes to their doctor and does the doctor say, well, what have you been eating?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. I mean,
never asked that. They just put you on any kind of pill.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the bottom line. That's the key to the whole mystery behind what may be wrong with you. And yeah, that gets brushed over and glossed over. And what was totally shocking to me, not to go off too much on my own story here, but was that I had some fairly serious issues, liver issues. And within almost 30 days, I didn't check until 60 days, but after trying for a year or almost 2 years to reverse that situation by changing my diet, it was reversed in 30 or 60 days. To me, that was just mind-blowing. I was like, this is going to take years, but I'm committed. I'm going to do it. But the diet just changed and reversed. It isn't completely healed, but the dramatic turnaround was just unbelievably stunning to me. And I was like, why? All the doctor had to tell me was just eat this or just change your diet to this and, let's see how it goes. I mean, they didn't have to say I'd be better, but they could say, try it. That to me, I think that's what began to really, make me become try to share this message with as many people as I possibly can, because it was something that simple and it made such a dramatic change in my health. And also the blood pressure issue too. Again, not totally resolved in my case, but the amount of change that was able to be affected in a very short period of time by eliminating processed foods and many of the other biomarkers. I've put some of them, on the site for people to see because I know there'd be questions about it. But that is just huge in my mind. And yet you could just accept the pills as they're given and you'll be on those for years. And the next step for me was probably quite shortly is type 2 diabetes for sure. And then the thing you talk about too in your book is what they're now beginning to call diabetes type 3, which is Alzheimer's, which they think there's a link between the processed food, the sugar, and all these things, and the decline of your brain. And I would agree.
But they're just all vascular issues. So
right.
If you have too much sugar in your blood, it is, your blood's not designed to carry a lot of sugar, and it destroys your arteries, which is, what supplies your whole body with, nutrients and oxygen. And, when you just jack up your sugar levels in the blood each day, I mean, it damages the blood vessels in your penis or in your brain. I mean, everywhere. And the science is just becoming, very, very clear. I guess that's good.
Yeah.
We're understanding why this food's so bad. So
yeah. As you said, the sugar is key, and what's happened to me over many, many years is, of course, insulin resistance in the extreme, and then all the things that follow beyond that prevent you from being able to help yourself. And the more medications you add on top of that, you're not doing anything to stop that. You're just masking it. And when I was able to change my diet, again, my blood sugar dropped pretty dramatically into the green zone. And it was not due to any medication. It was just the medicine of food. So again, all those things just were stunning.
All this technology is, because I get pitched all these devices and stuff, and I am very interested to see when the first device comes out that's quite simple and that shows you your blood pressure and your blood sugar, throughout the day. Like that is something that might be very helpful and interesting.
I think there might be an app out there for that, or something like that. I was just trying to think if I've seen something like it. I know you can get the little devices where you can read your sugar, like the diabetics do, but I think there might be There might be one out there. We'll put a link in the show notes if I find it, because I think there is technology.
Apple's the long-awaited iWatch, I think they're talking about adding these things that are very non-intrusive. So
yeah, and the Basis watch, or the Basis wristband that I forget who's developing that, but I've heard about it, and it takes your skin temperature, does a lot of things. They're trying to make that a little bit more on the quantified self plane. But anyway, all right. I don't want to take up too much more time. So thanks so much, Tyler. And we'll put some links in the show notes so that people can find you and follow your articles. And they should definitely follow you on Twitter and follow your website and get your book.
Thank you so much.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for listening to the podcast today. If you'd like more information about any of the topics discussed on today's program, just go to fattofitmyquest.com/blog and you'll find all the information and links to anything discussed in today's episode. Also, we'd love to hear from you, and if you'd like to ask a question or leave a comment, you'll see a button on the right-hand side of the page. Just tap it and you can start speaking and leave us a question or a comment. Also, we want to let you know that we'll be having new episodes every Thursday, so tune in and subscribe and don't miss a single one.